I am eager to talk a little bit more about your perspective on the U.S. economy, but I need to go back for a moment to our conversation about the British election, George Osborne's economic policies, and Paul Krugman's criticism, and more importantly, your criticism of Paul Krugman. And the reason I'm belaboring this point is because in your piece for the Huffington Post, you address the criticism of Osborne, or at least the criticisms. How should I put it? You make the point that had Britain bought troubled assets instead of injecting capital directly into the banks, things would have been better. And you draw a comparison to the United States.
That's not quite what I said, Eric.
All right.
What I said was that it was wrong to say that TARP, when it became, that's the Troubled Asset Relief Program, when it became a matter of equity injection, which it did because it evolved under Tim Geithner, was comparable with the nationalization of banks like RBS that Gordon Brown was responsible for. Remember, Paul Krugman argued, let me just finish. Paul Krugman argued that nationalization was the way to go. The government should take over these banks, and that actually happened in the UK. 80% of RBS is owned by the UK government to this day. The US took a different approach. It did end up buying equity in the form of preferred stock. It's all been sold off, and the stakes were never anything like so large. So if you ask Larry Summers, hey, did we do what Paul Krugman recommended? His answer would be no.
I'm going to do something very dangerous, which is suggest that you might be wrong.
Go ahead.
The Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, began, you're absolutely right, in concept as a asset purchase program.
And then, as I said,
instead, but it changed only in concept. When it was passed as a program to inject capital directly into the banks. And that's when Hank Paulson was still the Treasury Secretary. That was October of 2008. It didn't evolve into an asset purchase program until Geithner had become the Treasury Secretary in March of 2009.
Well, the original, as you can tell by the name TARP, the original idea was to buy distressed assets. And later they ended up buying preferred stock. So you got the sequence the wrong way around, Eric. And there's a big difference between doing that and then subsequently selling off these small stakes, which the Treasury did, and taking over 80% of a bank,
clearly,
which is what happened in the UK.
What happened
the
with
UK
RBS
still owns RBS.
Very different from what they did to Citigroup and Bank of America.
So if the US government today owned 80% of Citi, we could say they did what Gordon Brown and Paul Krugman recommended, right? There's a difference.
Let us move on to talk about something you alluded to moments ago, or minutes ago, how long it's going to take before the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, and that perhaps being one of the reasons we've seen the dollar take a leg down in recent weeks.
Well, I want to give Paul Krugman his due. He was right about the direction of rates back when we first debated in 2009-2010. And it's important to acknowledge when your antagonist is right. It's something that he never does. I'm hoping he will finally do it over the UK. But he was right that we were in a much more depressed condition and that rates were not likely to jump up anytime soon. Now, when you ask yourself, and I, of course, updated my view in the light of that and subsequently wrote about the real dangers of a deflation that might only be warded off by unconventional monetary policy. At first, I was a skeptic about quantitative easing. I admit that I was wrong about that, too. You know, you have to be prepared to own the things that you called wrong if you're going to be credible. And this is the big challenge he faces. He's one of those commentators that feels he should never admit error. He will reluctantly concede he got the internet wrong, but that's about it. So, you know, on QE, I was wrong. I underestimated
I'm
the
going to
importance
stay
of
out of the debate between you and Krugman, but I will agree with you that it is absolutely critical to admit one's mistakes. Neil, it is such a pleasure having you here. As always, that is Niall Ferguson, Professor of Economic History at Harvard University.